Let's start with the European Parliament. It's been debating new EU rules that require all but the smallest companies, SMEs, to carry out due diligence for imports of 4 minerals which may come from war-torn or conflict-racked areas of the world. In June last year, after several years of negotiation, the EU finally reached a political understanding on a new set of regulations that are designed to break the links between the mineral trade, armed groups and human rights abuses. Now, forcing firms to adhere to international monitoring standards aims to prevent money from the sale of the minerals of these particular commodities falling into the hands of armed groups. The checks will need to be undertaken by importers of tin, tungsten, gold and tantalum. That last one is a metal often used in mobile phones. A deal reached on the rules towards the end of last year will only see exemptions being granted for small-scale importers like dentists and jewelers. Let's get the latest details on the developments from Brussels. Kevin Osberg joins us now live from that city with more data on the story. Kevin, why exactly did the EU Parliament and the EU Commission eventually decide to focus only on raw materials but not finished goods in the version of the regulations agreed to in November?
Well, the reason is because a lot of those items that these minerals are used to manufacture that you just listed off there, like cell phones, as well as industrial machinery, are not produced in Africa, but rather it's these raw minerals that include gold, tin, and tungsten are bought from European importers, then imported here to this continent, and then they are spread to various manufacturing facilities to make these goods that so many of us use. So the reason why the EU is really focused on the raw material or the raw minerals here rather than the finished product is because they firmly believe, and based on just the reality of how the supply chain works, is that it's when these minerals are bought in various conflict-rich countries that are also rich in these minerals. It's the raw resources when they're bought. That money can then be used to fuel local armed conflicts.
Indeed, there also seems to be quite the gap between what the EU Parliament was voting on in mid-2015 and what eventually was agreed to between the Parliament and the Commission in November. But what were these main changes that happened in between, and why were they necessary?
Well, this certainly has been working its way through Brussels for years now, this proposal or this bill. One of the reasons why it really has taken a good amount of time to work its way through the Brussels system is because this proposal really had fierce opposition from business lobbyists. They really fought hard against this, and they really did slow this down through the lawmaking process. But still, EU leaders were determined to push this forward and to move it forward. So business lobbyists didn't exactly get what they want when it comes to this, with a few exceptions. One of the things that the business lobby was able to slip in here is as soon as this bill will be signed off by the European Council, which is the next step here, and it's very likely that the Council will approve this and turn this into EU law, it won't go into effect immediately. These import companies will have 5 years, so until 2021, to make sure that they have their due diligence processes in place. The EU says that may work out for both sides here. It'll give the companies time to make sure that they are closely watching where they buy their minerals from, their sources, their direct sources. It also gives the 28 EU member states time to hire and find regulators who will be pouring through the data that these import companies provide with them in terms of their due diligence procedures. So really the EU says they are willing to work with this 5-year enactment clause.
Indeed. One last question for you, Kevin. Rights groups like Global Witness, for example, they welcome the passage of this law, but they also argued that it really doesn't go far enough. They argued, for example, that it has extremely generous loopholes, like exempting 100 kilos of gold per year from supply chain checks, so having that long multi-year grace period that you mentioned before enforcement. Does the EU Commission have a response to that?
Well, yes, specifically when it comes to the very small importers like jewelry makers, like dentists who use some of these minerals and, of course, gold jewelry. But when it comes to the dentistry side of this, some of these minerals are used to create bridges and fillers for teeth. The EU says it's okay to give them an exemptions, that they don't have to be a part of this new regulation. And that's because these small enterprises, it would be very tough for them to deal with all this. It would really be a bureaucratic burden for them. That's the term that some members of the European Parliament use. So really the focus of this proposal is on the very large-scale importers, really where we're talking about the big bucks here that are behind huge sums of money being paid for these minerals that the EU worries, these large sums, it's what's truly funding some of these armed conflicts like in the Democratic Republic of Congo as well as the Central African Republic.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Kevin Osbeck in Brussels. Thank you.